Our next panelist is Adia Benton, who is a cultural anthropologist who teaches at Northwestern University. She is the author HIV Exceptionalism, Development Through Disease in Sierra Leone, Minnesota Press, University of Minnesota Post, and is currently finishing a book about the 2014 West African Ebola pandemic. Adia will speak on policing function and of within public health. Adia, please share your wisdom with us.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm hoping I can, hope there is wisdom to share. But thanks for the invitation, and also thanks for the introduction. So the way that I've been, I guess I'll start with May 30th, 2020. And that was in Minnesota, 5 days after police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And of course, there were protests against police violence. And those were organized nationwide, along with these increasing calls to defund and abolish the police. And around the time, I think there was a press conference being held by the governor, Minnesota's public safety commissioner, and he said, as in response to a journalist, Minnesota Public Radio journalist's question, what are you doing for these people who are these white nationalists who are also trying to stage these counter protests? And he said something like, as we've begun making arrests, we started to analyze our data, we've arrested people, and we're doing what we call something very similar to our COVID, is contact tracing. Who are they associated with? What platforms are they advocating for? And so at the time, of course, this statement about likening police action to contact tracing caused a little bit of an uproar, but particularly among a kind of liberal set of epidemiological modelers. I don't think I'll name this one, but she has a lot of followers, and she said something like, "This is not contact tracing. What is described in the video?" I'm actually quoting her, so you can find it yourself. It's police work. So see the two link jeopardizes the credibility of public health, which needs community trust to work effectively. And so at the time, I responded to her by saying, you're probably right. It probably does, likening police work to public health is probably not a good thing for community trust. But I mean, what I would say is that she was also wrong. Like these are actually intimately connected. And so what I think I said to her was something like, Harrington, the public safety commissioner, was just saying the quiet part out loud. Now, what do I mean by this? The argument that I'm making, and I make this by talking specifically about contact tracing during the Ebola pandemic in West Africa, and the people's experiences of public health workers going door to door on a daily basis and interrogating people in ways that I think don't always appear to be in the best interest of the people being interrogated. So the question that I've been dealing with is how public health has been an extension of police power. And this is something that Mark Neocleous, who writes about police power and the critique of police power, talks about extensively, but it's also something that people who study the history of policing, say from London, from the beginning, from the inception of the London Metropolitan Police, German notions of medical police, and so on. So this idea of communities to be policed or to be contact traced are untrustworthy sort of quasi-criminal subjects. People who are understood as being subject to state surveillance and routinely subject to its violence. So this quote that I have here, I'm trying to do this 5-minute thing to see if it's going to work. The policing is much more about police, just as war is about much more than the military, and that police power is first and foremost a weapon of the state. Public health, particularly as it is leveraged here for COVID-19, is a domain of police power, and I argue a similar thing for the experiences that people had with contact tracers in this sort of during the Ebola pandemic. I'm also talking specifically about, so when I guess when Edgar introduced, I said it was something like in and of within policing. So that, so there's the metaphorical or analogic link that Harrington is making, and that Caitlin, that in the epidemiological modeler took issue with. But there is also what I know to be true about certain public health functions, which is that police are also actual sort of, I guess, what people recognize as formal policing institutions are also partnering with public health. So both in the case of Ebola, we had, and if you look at the old MSF archival documents alongside the actual plans for public health, what you'll see is that police and military were absolutely first line responders within public health outreach. So they were manning the quarantines, managing checkpoints with temperature checks. And often that was mobilized in ways that looked like Sierra Leone civil war in the early 90s, so that decade-long war. And so people talked about these sort of choke points where certain people could pass and certain people were held up on the basis of a temperature check, but also this idea that isolation quarantine was a function to be managed by the police and the military. And then there's other uses of contact tracing. So for sexually transmitted infections, I was working with one of my friends who was an anthropologist doing STI, sexually transmitted infection outbreaks in the South, and she often talked about how when she was investigating or looking into, say, a syphilis or chlamydia outbreak amongst sex workers who were often undocumented, they were afraid to participate because they understood that police were also a part of the sort of contact tracing function, because sex work was illegal, but also their citizenship status was also in question. And so this in, of, and within, it's looking at the various ways that police power is coordinated with public health. And then I'll stop there, because I think I would like to make sure that we have enough time for Adelita's piece, but also our discussion at the end.